talk about some buy low candidates, guys that underperformed here in week 4 that, fantasy owners are wondering, hey, is this a guy that I need to be going out and sending out some offers for? Is this something that we should be expecting more of in the future, these down weeks? I want to start with a couple running backs and we'll talk about some wide receivers. But the first one here, Jonathan Taylor, really disappointing outing after, we thought he was going to be absolutely insane taking over this backfield with Marlon Mack out. Now he's on his second week with a disappointing outing with less than 14 fantasy points. Against Chicago, Taylor had 9 total fantasy points, only played 46% of snaps. He did have 17 attempts, which you love to see there, for 68 yards, and then just had 1 target through the air, caught it for 11 yards. So, it's just something where he needed the touchdown to save his day, and is that going to be a recurring theme? He scored touchdowns in the last 2 games that have really saved you. I'm starting to be a little bit concerned for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe he's not quite this, Saquon Barkley level, Nick Chubb level, generational talent that's just going to come in and absolutely dominate from day one.
Yeah, it's been disappointing as a Colts fan. I mean, Taylor hasn't looked necessarily great. I mean, he's been okay. He's had some good plays. He's had some good runs, but he hasn't looked necessarily great. So, it's tough. I expect him to get things going. There's no excuses when you see other guys dominating. Like we saw CEH come out game 1 in the NFL and dominate. But with Taylor, everyone kind of reacts and adapts differently. There's been no offseason. He came in getting a lot of reps with the twos behind Marlon Mack. So, and Chicago's got a good defense as well. So you got to give him some time to ramp up. And I think Taylor is definitely a buy low candidate. The upside is still there for me. I think he's still got that top 12 RB1 upside full season. And when I look at this Colts team, they just haven't had to do a lot this season. Like, they're dominating games with their defense. Vikings, they absolutely dominated. Jets, they dominated. Bears, they dominated. So they've been in these low-volume games, and the offense hasn't really needed to open it up and explode. So I expect them to kind of get things going for their offense in the next couple weeks. At your Browns next week, Steph, we're going to have some sort of bet on that one. Then they got the Bengals and the Lions. So I think Taylor's going to have 3 good games here. If you've got him, keep him in your lineup. I think he's going to turn it around. And although it is frustrating to see, these other guys, Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines, combining for 18 carries, it's still nice to see Taylor get 17 of his own. I would like him, to take some of those carries away from Jordan Wilkins. He was in the game way too much, only had 1.7 yards per carry. But Taylor's going to get things going. I have no doubt. Just like we were saying with Joe Mixon, a little bit more passing work and a touchdown or 2 are really going to shift the narrative. I expect Taylor to have some of those things go his way here in the next couple of weeks. So if you have the chance to buy low on him, even after this game, I think you got to go do it. In our home league, Steph, we saw someone trade, David Montgomery in a couple of pieces for Jonathan Taylor. I love that move. Send another RB2 and a couple of other guys who might help as flexes or, tight end depth. There's never enough tight ends. So if you have 2 of them, maybe try to package them in a deal and go pick up Jonathan Taylor for yourself, because I think he's got a ton of upside at the running back position, and I'm not out on him yet.
Still a guy, maybe he's not top 3 upside like a lot of people were claiming. I still think he has top 10, top 8 upside at the running back spot, and things are only going to get better. He's a full workhorse back essentially, even with those other guys coming in. Let's talk about another running back that was heavily touted before the season, was going in the first round in a lot of drafts, and is seeing the passing game work that we wanted him to see. It's Josh Jacobs, only 10 fantasy points. And really after he exploded in week 1 in that 3 touchdown performance against Carolina, hasn't returned on that value in 3 tough matchups, 13 points, 8 points, 10 points, but has still been on the field a ton, has had double-digit carries in every single game, actually 15 or more carries in every single game, but just wasn't able to get much going this week. 3.2 yards per attempt. The Raiders' offensive line couldn't get anything going, but did see the 4 targets that we wanted him to see. So with Josh Jacobs, for me, he's still a hold. He's kind of going through the same thing that Joe Mixon did, where there's some tough matchups. You're not seeing the boom weeks. You're not seeing any touchdowns. Those are going to come with Josh Jacobs, a guy who is a full 3-down workhorse back, is getting targets through the air. I'm trying to buy low on him everywhere I can, and I'm not selling. If I have him, I'm plugging him right back in here against Kansas City in week 5.
No, I'm with you 100%. If you got him, you got to hold. You got to stick it out. He's getting the work. He's getting the volume in the passing game that we wanted him to get this season. I mean, if you look at the Raiders games, obviously Jacobs had the 3 touchdowns in week 1, which was awesome. If you look at week 2 against the Saints, Derek Carr threw a 3-yard touchdown pass and a 1-yard touchdown pass. Both red zone opportunities that easily could have gone Jacobs' way. If you look at them in week 3, Derek Carr threw a 1-yard touchdown pass. And then this past week against the Bills, Carr threw a 3-yard touchdown pass and a 7-yard touchdown pass. So Carr's throwing all these touchdowns inside of the 10-yard line. And, that's going to continue to happen. You're always going to, want to be multidimensional on the goal line in the red zone. But I would start to expect them to kind of start, giving Josh Jacobs the looks that close to the goal line. He did it really well in his rookie season. He's done it well this year when he's had the opportunities. So look for more of those opportunities and looks to go Josh Jacobs' way. It's good to me that the Raiders are at least getting down in the scoring zone. The Raiders offense has actually been decent this year, even with a lot of the receiving options out of the lineup. So you said it, you're buying low on Josh Jacobs, sending out offers for him. And if you have him, you just got to hold. Luckily, he hasn't absolutely crushed you in any of these games, no like 2-point performances, but definitely hasn't quite returned on that value just yet.
Part of the natural kind of ebb and flow of fantasies, you just see guys who have cold stretches, but there's also going to be some boom upside stretches and big weeks coming, and I think Josh Jacobs is going to be one of those. Another guy that some guys were even, fantasy drafters were taking back-to-back at the end of the first, second round turn is Miles Sanders along with Josh Jacobs. Sanders with a tough one in this game. Looked like he even got pulled towards the end there after a couple bad drops. He had 13 attempts for 46 yards, only caught 2 of his 4 targets for 30 yards, 9.6 fantasy points in a tough matchup against San Francisco. Are you reading into this one too much? Are you plugging Sanders right back in there?
Sanders, man, this one's a tough one for me. I think he's been fine. It's the same with all these guys. Like Sanders, really rough game here on Sunday Night Football, but he's another player who's getting the work on the ground. He's getting passing work. It was a little bit lower this week in a really tough matchup against the 49ers. And in the next 2 weeks, he does have Pittsburgh and Baltimore. So, I don't think I'm trying to buy him low right now. Maybe I'll wait for the Pittsburgh game, for the Baltimore game. If he has a couple bad weeks, his value is going to go down to the person that has him on their roster. So maybe you can buy low at that point. But if you have him, I'm still holding. I think against Pittsburgh, against Baltimore, just from a volume perspective, Miles Sanders is still a guy who could turn in a solid game. He's a guy you have to start each and every week because there's just not a lot of players in the league right now getting 13 to 17 carries a game and 5 or 6 targets a game. So I know the Eagles offense has struggled. The matchups aren't going to be great here, but you got to hold on to Miles Sanders and hope for the best and hold on for the ride because we said it with Joe Mixon. Even though we were concerned, if you try to sell him low now, you're not going to get as much for him as you should. And thankfully for Mixon this past week, it turned into a really productive performance. So one big game from Miles Sanders is totally going to flip the narrative of what the rest of his year looks like.
Yeah, I would wait till after this Pittsburgh game, even after Baltimore. I think most fantasy players are getting smart enough now that they're going to know that, in a matchup against the Giants, they probably shouldn't trade away Miles Sanders, who still was on the field just as often. Like from a snap percentage, he just in the late game when they're coming back, final drive, it was all Boston Scott, and even Corey Clement was in there. But after this Pittsburgh Week 5 matchup, I'd be trying to scoop up Miles Sanders everywhere I possibly can, just like I would with Jonathan Taylor.
Steph, one more guy I want to talk about. I know it's not in our sheet, but I feel like we have to talk about this guy because going into the year, he was kind of in that same tier as Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders. We've talked about him a lot, but I just want to get a quick take on Kenyan Drake. To me, I'm much more concerned about Kenyan Drake than I was last week. I mean, terrible game against one of the worst run-Ds in the league, the Carolina Panthers. Kenyan Drake, 13 carries for 35 yards. And he's just not getting looks in the passing game. 0 targets in this game after only getting 2 targets, and 1 target through the first 3. The last 2 weeks, Detroit and Carolina should have been these bounce-back matchups for Kenyan Drake, and he's fallen flat in both of them. What are we doing with Kenyan Drake right now? Is he a hold? If someone comes to try to buy him from you, are you willing to sell? Or is he someone you're even going to go out and try to acquire in leagues? Or are you kind of trying to avoid Kenyan Drake? I mean, Chase Edmonds has looked good. Edmonds had, only 4 carries, but 16 yards on the ground and had the receiving touchdown in this game on 6 targets. What are we doing with this Cardinals backfield? Because I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about Kenyan Drake.
Oh, man, it's really concerning, and I hate this because I was all over Drake preseason. I thought he was going to absolutely explode. This offense is, moving, even though they did end up losing in this game, and Kyler didn't play his best. But, the air raid offense that we all like that creates fantasy value for all the skill position players is just not giving us that right now. The air raid is more looking like not even the run raid really. It's more of this, short, quick passing game. It's the, more of a horizontal. Think New Orleans Saints, the way they've been playing here the last 2 weeks when Kyler's been, kind of sloppy going downfield. So I don't really know what to do with Drake. He's probably a guy that, I'm willing to start him against the Jets. Go back to the well one more time. I thought this was going to be the game for him against Carolina. Once he had that explosion, it was wheels up for Drake for the rest of the season. That did not happen here. Ended up having his worst game of the season so far, only 3.5 fantasy points. That did absolutely crush your lineup. You got to plug him back in, give him one more chance against the Jets. If he can't give you anything there, then I'm willing to move on, sell him for pennies on the dollar, and just see if I can get any sort of value, because he's if you can't do it against Carolina and New York, you're not going to do it.
So let's go ahead and move on to a couple of wide receivers. First one here, DJ Moore, the wide receiver 2 on the Carolina Panthers. Steph, what are you doing with DJ Moore? I mean, he's really only put up one fantasy performance that you're happy about so far this year, and it was in garbage time against Tampa Bay in week 2. Fun fact on the Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater is 4th in the NFL. This is before the Monday night games with, Mahomes, Rodgers, and Matt Ryan. So maybe that changes after this Monday night game. But right now he's 4th in the NFL. Teddy is in passing yards. The volume is huge for this Carolina Panthers football team, yet DJ Moore still hasn't really produced. What are we doing with DJ Moore?
I think I'd still be willing to buy him low. I'm not going to overpay for him, but he does have a great matchup against Atlanta here in week 5. I think it's the stage is going to get set for a get-right game for DJ. From a talent perspective, I like him way over Robbie Anderson. I don't know where this chemistry is coming from. I saw somebody saying, hey, maybe Teddy and Robbie worked out together on the Jets more than we all thought. And these guys have some rapport there that's been built. And something I thought is that when CMC went out with injury, that DJ Moore was going to get an uptick in all facets. He was going to get more targets, more looks in the red zone. He's not seeing that because Mike Davis essentially stepped in and just taken over this CMC role and done really well with it. We saw Reggie Bonifant come in and get get a touchdown in this game as well, and he's been fun when he's been called upon in Carolina. I think it's something that's half game script and half game plan. I still believe in the talent of DJ Moore. He's seeing decent enough target volume that you just got to keep plugging him back in. You mentioned the production that Teddy Bridgewater has offered them. He's just a guy that, look, he's in a tough stretch. He gave you that 120-point week. Outside of that, you're getting, about 10 points, a little bit less than 10 points on a weekly basis. That's just what you expect from a wide receiver too. So, look, temper expectations with DJ, but plug him back in against Atlanta. Hope he can pop off again and give you another 120-yard performance and 20 fantasy points like he did against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think you plug him back in a great matchup against Atlanta. If he does have a big week, I might be willing to sell, because he's just not going to get the touchdowns. He's never been a touchdown guy. And, the 13 target game for 120 yards was great in week 2. But outside of that, if he's only seeing 6, 7, 8 targets a game, and he's putting up, 4 for 60, 5 for 60, things like that with that touchdown, he's absolutely killing you for the value you got him. So if he has a big week out here in week 5 against Atlanta, I think he's a sell. But if you don't, I think he's still, like you said, a low-end wide receiver 2 with some upside weeks for the rest of the season. But anytime you take a guy in, the 3rd round, and through 4 weeks, Scotty Miller, Cole Beasley, and Tim Patrick have more fantasy points than you, it's a tough scene.
Absolutely. And let's talk about Darius Slayton, last buy low candidate here. Played on 97% of snaps with Sterling Shepard and Saquon Barkley gone from this New York Giants offense. Saw 7 targets, but only caught 3 of them for 48 yards. What are we doing with Darius Slayton? I loved him early on in the year, had that big explosive 28-point game against Pittsburgh, but things have kind of fizzled out since then. Hasn't hit double-digit fantasy points in 3 weeks now. Are you willing to buy him knowing that the usage is still going to be there with Shepard out? Is he a guy that you're just, it's kind of you're on your bench and you're just considering him if he's there in a flex and he's the best guy there?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we expect out of Darius Slayton. It happened a little bit differently because the pop game was in week 1. But if he would have had, 3 for 53, 3 for 48, and then in week 3 had a pop game, we'd be like, oh, Slayton had one of his 3 pop games that he's going to have this year. So this is business as usual for Darius Slayton. I'm not really wanting to go acquire him, give anything up for him. He's rostered in 72% of leagues right now. So the ownership percentage is declining on a week-by-week basis after another disappointing performance. I think he's going to end up on a lot of waiver wires. So if he's out there, definitely scoop him up because he's kind of in that Michael Gallup category right now of someone who is involved in the offense. He's going to be able to have big plays, big yards per catch, things like that. And occasionally he's going to pop off for that massive game. So I'm not necessarily trying to buy low. He's just another guy you can throw in your flex as a wide receiver 4 if someone's on bye, someone's injured, and hope that it's one of the few pop weeks that he's going to have over the course of the season.
If I can, I would try to acquire him, and I'll tell you why. It's because the schedule opens up massively for the Giants here over the next couple of weeks. They have Dallas, Washington, then Philly, and then after that, then they have Tampa Bay, and then it's gorgeous the rest of the way. Washington, Philly, Cincinnati, Seattle, Arizona, Cleveland, and then Baltimore in Week 16. But if you can buy low on Darius Slayton right now don't overpay for him. I would give you, maybe another wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, maybe one that has some name hype, or maybe a guy that's, got some usage, had a pop week. Go sell him and try to pick up Slayton because I think there's still a ton of boom upside potential for him to take over as the wide receiver 1 in this team, as the guy that Danny Dimes looks to score points when they need it. It's just the last couple of games, the Giants as a whole have just looked absolutely brutal. If they can get it together, I think Slayton's going to absolutely benefit from that. So I'm willing to take the shot, put a couple chips in on Slayton, but not overpaying by any means.
Steph, Slayton or Michael Gallup rest of the season in PPR?
I'd go Gallup just by a hair.
Fair. Better offense, better quarterback.
Exactly.
Totally, but they're the same.
Better O-line. That's probably the main thing.
Yeah, similar situations for me as a whole.